All right. Hello. Can I invite you to just take a deep breath with me and acknowledge the fact that we're here? It's been a week, and we're here, and you showed up. And thank you for being here. So grateful to be in your presence. And for everyone online, I know there's always a great group online. So thank you for being here. There's so many things we have to juggle. I, for one, am particularly excited about being amongst these amazing people and you all. And I'm looking forward to what we're going to discover today. So my name is Zoe Corwin. I'm research faculty over at the Puglia Center for Higher Education up in the Rossier School. Most of my research deals with college access and success. I had a few years, really fun years, where I was doing some work with skateboarders and looking at the intersection of skateboarding, mental health, and community. And I learned so much from the skaters about just different ways of being well and practicing community care. I mean, they weren't using those words, but those are my academic words. And that sort of brought me into a journey of learning more about wellness and just thinking differently. So the way that today's going to work, because I know some of you are return guests, and some of you are new, so welcome. So my colleagues, Corey Buckner over here and Eric Canny online, and Dean Noguera, who was unable to come today but sends you his regards. We picked this theme of reimagining well-being in learning spaces. And we knew that the theme was going to resonate with people, but I think it is now feels like it's resonating even more deeply after, just where we're at as a society. And when we started planning the series, our goal was to bring really different and diverse perspectives into this space. So perspectives that you don't usually hear about when we think about mental health and well-being. Our first session, in this the fall semester, we've been focused on students, so learning about students' experiences. The first event, we focused on students in K-12 settings. The last event, we focused on students in post-secondary settings, both undergraduate and graduate. And then today, we're talking about third spaces, informal learning spaces, which are often overlooked as these incredible places where really cool things happen. And our goals really are to learn together and then also perhaps imagine new ways of being and thinking and feeling and being well and taking care of each other, which I think we're going to discover together because I know a little bit about what they're going to share. Just a note to say in the spring, we'll have 3 more sessions. They're going to focus on the people who take care of students. The first one's going to focus on teachers and faculty. The second one's going to talk about practitioners and staff, K-12 and post-secondary ed. And then the third one's going to focus on administrators and leaders in the educational space. So I know some of you have questions about, well, how do you care for the people who care for the students? We are going to focus mostly on students today, but there'll probably be some more systemic things that come through. Okay. We have asked the panelists to please share 6 minutes worth of expertise and insights. That's like no time at all. So they're really, they have a few slides, each of them, just to kind of, to introduce you and their expertise to you. Introduce them to you and their expertise to you. And then we'll go into Q&A. And I have a few questions that I'll share, and then we're hoping that you all will ask questions, and we'll get questions from our online community as well. And you might be asked to play along with some of the things that are shared in this space, so a little interactive. So online, and here you can see each incredible person. I will have them introduce themselves when they start their presentation. Suffice to say, we were really thoughtful in who we invited to be part of this panel, and I'm so grateful to you all for being here, and thank you in advance for what you will share. So we can advance the first slide, and Davina, you're up first.
Awesome. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Very grateful to be here with such a cool group of individuals and an amazing panel. And Zoe and team, thank you for bringing us together. So a little bit about me. My pronouns are she, her. I'm an associate professor of practice of design. My background is in experience design. I've spent quite a number of years and a lot of my timeline dedicated to museums and third spaces, so bringing together people in non-traditional learning environments. I'm also an associate dean of inclusive learning and diverse excellence, and I work over at the Iovine and Young Academy. So for those of you that are new to our newest school here at USC, we would love to invite you over and to welcome you into any of our classrooms and our conversations around integrated practices in design, business, and tech. I'm also a founder and designer. As I mentioned, my background is in experience design. I do have an active studio here that is female-led in LA in experience design, so working with museums, schools, theme parks, you name it, offices, industry. I get pulled into all sorts of strange and wonderful places to do what I do. I'm also a community mentor. I stay active in professional circuits to help those that are up and coming, and of course, our students. And I'm a mom, so there you go. All right, so when we look at human-centered design, we are missing a little bit of the slide. Oh, there it goes. Fantastic. It's animated. Who knew? All right, so when we look at human-centered design and how we might apply this to third spaces, it is this practice of bringing together people and really figuring out what it is that our audiences are seeking and needing and desiring. What is it that they have as top-of-mind desires, but also what are some of those needs that are perhaps being unmet in the existing spaces that people are going to and learning within, right? I think we can all, how many of you all are educators? Just curious, show of hands. Yo, there we are. All right, so you all know your environment is basically another teacher in the room. It is a facilitator for you. And I'm sure that each of you spend quite a number of hours and time and dedication and love creating that environment that is supportive of your students. So for us as human-centered designers, we really are looking at this practice of the third space, or the development of the third space, the educational learning environment, in terms of the needs of those students. So in human-centered design, we are thinking, of course, of empathy, of co-design. How are we asking and inviting in conversation around the development of these spaces? How are we considering social determinants in the work that we do in developing these spaces? And of course, how are we developing an inclusive process in creating these spaces? That learning mindset that we're catering to in a non-traditional learning environment is all about questioning and visualizing, prototyping maybe even. We're making with some of our students, we're developing those solutions, we're furthering their ideas. We really are facilitating what it is that they're trying to accomplish as goal within our learning space. And of course, if we're doing it well, we're creating a story around all of that so that it does feel like it is just intuitive, the way that this work develops. Now for third spaces, here are some of our goals in those spaces. We're looking to build a sense of social connection or socialization. How are we coming together? In third spaces, we also are identifying this need for community. How are we bringing together community and encouraging people to have conversations, maybe even have those unexpected, beautiful collisions of personality, right, and identity? How are we also considering that informal learning structure? Y'all, a classroom is very different than a third space because we don't sit at a desk, yeah? So how do we feel comfortable but still pay attention to what it is that we're sharing in terms of learning material? What are those environmental supports? So if I am still learning, do I need to sit? Do I need to stand? Do I need to jump? Do I need to run? How is the environment reflective of those needs? How am I also inviting people into play? Y'all remember as kiddos, we learn really fast when we play. So in a third space, where is that sense of play being invited in? And then of course, how are we encouraging our participants, our audience, our folks that are visiting these spaces to be brave in those interactions? All right, so there we go. All right, in non-traditional learning environments, I mentioned there are a couple different types here that we consider to be third spaces, quote unquote. And I'm sure you all could add quite a few more to the list as we understand it. These are a couple that come up in my expertise and in my practice. So museums, art and science, yeah. Also family spaces. How are we bringing together the family or the community, if you will? Those centers for community and the development of community. Right? Where are we seeking out like-minded people to hang out with and to further our educations, to learn from, maybe scaffold our learning, but also just to have that sense of belonging as we come together? Where are we creating those open studios or perhaps those collaborative workspaces? Y'all remember when WeWork was big? Still kicking around. But there is that sense of the third space that was developed in WeWork. Why was that? It wasn't just because you got a free beer. It was because you could go and seek out the environment that was particularly suited to your type of work. The environment was supportive to what it was that you were trying to do, whether that was a collaborative meeting, whether that was individualized work, whether that was you wanting to sit in a sunny spot, or a dark and shaded spot within the environment. It was very well programmed in the way that was executed. Okay, as I mentioned, there's centers for community, and of course, places of rest and renewal being very important. And I tend to think of these as the gardens, our centers for mindfulness and practice, which we will definitely hear about with some of my colleagues here. So as we're developing these third spaces, I want you to keep in mind 3 areas of development. Within that third space, we are looking for informal interactions. As I mentioned, some of those collisions that we encourage amongst our audience. And in a third space, it's kind of unique because we can have students. We can also have what I like to call the 0 to 100. Literally, anybody of any age group entering these spaces. So how are we creating that invitation to all of those age groups? We also want to think about what is programmatic event versus just informal opportunity within the space. Right? When we put on an event within a museum, it's advertised like you all came here today, you knew what you're doing, versus you just show up and you get to engage and you get to pick, you get to choose your own adventure while you're there. And that's very important. We also want to think about the preferred locations in the third space. What are those places within a third space that are highly trafficked? For example, is it the kitchen? Is it the water cooler? Is it the bathrooms? Is it parking? Right? All of these things we do want to think about because that is a very necessary and needy part of the overall experience that our community members are going to walk away with. And of course, that open engagement component where people are just meeting each other and again, choosing what they want to do. So for the audience in there, we are thinking about needs, wants, and desires. Mentioned that. Human-centered design kicking in again. We are also thinking about pain points. How is our space inclusive and adaptive to the needs of those audience members that are coming in and choosing to be there? And what are their potential preferences? And I do want to identify that there is a difference there, folks, between their pain points and their preferences, right? So how are we opening up opportunity for each of those? And how are we also listening to those preferences and those pain points? How often do we ask people what they think? You know those little feedback boxes? Show of hands, how many of you all put a feedback card in those little boxes? Okay. So tell us, we want to know, right? If the space isn't working, we want to evaluate it, we want to make it a little bit better. So again, how are we opening up discussion around the evaluation of these spaces? And our learning goals around entertainment, community, rest and renewal, education, and accessibility. So opening up those spaces for everybody, but creating learning opportunity and an invitation for learning to all that enter those spaces. All right. So as part of the work there, well-being can be supported by third spaces. Third spaces are often sought out. We see this as more on trend in dense urban areas to enhance well-being. So they are supportive spaces, but perhaps because we don't have the luxury of space within denser urban populations. And then, of course, when we use HCD techniques or human-centered design techniques, we are able to generate those responsive environments. We're constantly seeking out what it is that our audience is needing. We're also constantly evaluating and fine-tuning and making better and refining that process Y'all, a good designer is never done. All right, that's the conundrum. It's not a one and done thing, set it and forget it kind of thing. We're always at it. We're constantly evaluating the work at hand. All right, and how are we encouraging those audience members to rest, reflect, and renew moving forward in those spaces? And what is it that we particularly need? I was joking with Zoe that I was yelling at my closet last night. Right? I don't think I ever thought of my closet as needing to be a space for that kind of interaction, but there you are, right? So how are we constantly fine-tuning what it is that we're doing? And of course, talking to our community, talking to the audience of these third spaces in order to best understand what they need to do. So ideally, these environments should present a range of different engagement opportunities, be an invitation to all, and definitely address what the users are needing in meaningful ways. So I'm going to invite Martin.
Okay.
Thank you, Davina.
Thank you.
Thank you, Davina. Hi, everybody. My name is Martin. I use he, him pronouns. I'm in the Dornsife School in the PE Mind Body Health Department. And I also facilitate in the kind of non-traditional spaces a meditation group for trans, non-binary, gender non-conforming folks, as well as a faith-sharing group for LGBTQ Catholics. So I'm going to kind of bridge a little bit because a lot of the students who are part of these groups are also part of the college as well. And just kind of bringing an awareness to this sense of all of you when we talk about well-being. That we really kind of want to rehumanize the person. And oftentimes one of the pieces that's left out, especially in academic spaces, is the heart or spirit, right? We're supposed to be just walking minds with legs, like, walking around just like intellectual, everything's intellectual. But at the end of the day, like we collapse and like our body is the one that we have to kind of reconcile with at the end of the day. And oftentimes when difficult things arise in our culture, in our world, oftentimes we have to kind of go to something bigger to hold us. And each of us is a different thing. Sometimes we need to go out into nature, or if you have a spiritual belief or practice or religion, you go to that to kind of hold you in the midst of uncertainty, difficulty, illness, death, grief, right? These bigger things that we can't think our way out of, right? And so what I'm hoping to kind of bring into the equation, at least for these non-traditional spaces, is spirit, like the heart, like the core of who we are. At the end of the day, who are we? And so that's where this like image comes in. I think heart would be almost like that centering piece. So just, if you don't know, LGBTQ people face a lot of difficulties. We got your trauma, you got your oppression, you got your internalized bias. We know this, okay? And we also know that LGBTQ folks don't often feel safe in religious spaces or welcomed. And we know that spiritual health and well-being is a buffer against all of these things that are kind of coming at us. And so one of the things that is important to kind of think about, and there's a lot of words on the slide, don't worry about the slides, you'll get those later. But I just wanted you to have content later if you wanted to revisit. But we need this kind of sense of spiritual well-being. All of us, no matter who we are. In some senses. I don't know why they're all animated here, but don't worry again about the slides. So why is it important? Again, these things can help a person feel like a whole person. And so in our spaces, whether they're traditional or non-traditional, some of the things that we can do is kind of draw in the element of spirit, of heart. I could argue why that's important, but hopefully you're with me on some level that this might be an important thing to do. We talk about well-being. That's not well-thinking. That's not well-doing. It's being in our bodies, being in our hearts, being a full human being. And I think oftentimes it's hard to even say the word spirit in an academic setting without feeling embarrassed. And yet, this is a part of us as a human being. It's what makes us wonderful. It's a wonderful part of who we are. So the other thing I'm kind of just thinking about in terms of if you are facilitating spaces, and surely if you're teaching, there are going to be LGBTQ people in those spaces and or people who have a spiritual religious practice, how to kind of include that in our thinking and also kind of take into account that oftentimes with marginalized communities, we learn like, oh, trauma. And so we kind of almost like flatten people to the trauma that they've experienced, but I want to kind of invite in this sense of like, you know, there's such a thing as post-traumatic growth. There's a way in which people who have been marginalized have developed a degree of resilience that cannot be accessed without difficulty, without experiencing challenge. And so in some ways, to actually look at a person and kind of open to the possibility that, wow, they may have developed a kind of resilience that maybe even I myself have never even encountered, because I have not undergone the kind of challenges that they've had to undergo just to be able to sit in that seat. So there's a lot of ways in which I think we can reframe even the way that we look at people from marginalized groups to see like, oh wow, maybe there's something here I could learn, or maybe there's something here that we could like highlight or lift up as a strength, as something beautiful, and ask a person like, how have you reframed your situation? How have you grown? How have you gotten to this place? And to help them get in touch with the ways in which they have had to encounter their own sense of strength and their own human spirit. So the last thing I want to do, come on, is just share just a couple of practices that can do that. Doesn't matter what your spiritual beliefs are. It doesn't matter if you're an atheist. It doesn't matter if you're a practical atheist. It doesn't matter. None of these things matter. These are human things that I think oftentimes when they get relegated to religion, they almost either feel like super accessible to some or completely taboo to someone else, when in fact I think we need to democratize spiritual practices so that we can all benefit from the beauty of them, because they are powerful. For example, prayer. Whether you call it prayer or not, Anne Lamott says that every human being has 3 prayers that they do: wow, thank you, and help. That at some point in our lives, if you're a human, you will come across a sunset or a smiling baby or a loved one, and you'll look into their eyes and something will happen in your physical body, not your mind, that will say, wow, I'm struck by this. I'm struck by feeling connected to you. I'm connected to something bigger. I'm not just a thinking head. I'm a part of this creation that we're on. Like, I'm part of nature. I'm part of this relationship. And I think to remember and tap into those moments connects us to something else. Wow, like awe. The second prayer that she talks about is thank you. Like, if you've never had a moment of feeling truly grateful, something's missing, because you're taking a breath right now. Like, we can find something to be grateful for in every moment if we just open to the possibility that there's more here than what we see. And I think this also counteracts that negativity bias that we can tend to have, that's always looking for the problem to solve. What's wrong? What's missing? I need more. It's not enough. But thank you. Whoa, that's a different way of looking. What's here wow, look at all that's here. We're all here. We're all colleagues. We're at USC. Wow, this is great. There's something amazing happening right now. And my heart is beating. Okay, so we can find something if we just look a little harder. The last one that she mentions is help. And this is so important because even if you just normalize this idea that we're dependent on others, I'm wrapping it up. And 6 minutes is very short. I'm going to just say that for a fact. So, okay, help, like, we are dependent on others. We're not supposed to be self-made. Nobody here is here because of your own, like, volition. Like, we're not self-reliant. We depend upon one another. We've had mentors, we've had teachers, we've had coaches, we've had parents, loved ones. You can't even name them all the people that helped us get to where we are. So this sense of help, it's okay to struggle, and it's okay to need help. And if you're someone in a marginalized group and you're contemplating suicide and you think you can't ask for help because it's so stigmatized, then surely we're doing something wrong without, like, making it okay to need help. Nobody is here who did not at some point need help and get it, right? So that's really important. And I added in there, I'm sorry, because that kind of accountability is so important, especially when we experience so much shame. It's hard to admit when we've done something wrong because we already feel like we're so ashamed of who we are. But accountability can grow a sense of dignity and self. And so being able to say I'm sorry helps strengthen relationships in that way. So there are some other practices here, and you can look at them on your own time. But thank you for listening. Yeah.
Beatriz, am I on? I'm going to go rogue as a moderator for a second. Can everyone just take a moment and turn to the person next to you and share a wow moment that you might have had, or something like like what was wow for you recently, or like even in the mundane things? So just, we're going to spend literally 30 seconds doing this. For those of you online, if you could put it into the chat, just a wow moment. But you only have 30 seconds, so go.
I guess.
I know my
help moment was the
closet last night.
I'm sorry, was I late?
Okay. Join me in the anti-rogueness. Thank you for playing with that. Thank you. After we finish in the little reception, I'd love to hear other people's wow moments. Okay, so recentering us, we're going to hear from Beatriz.
Hi everyone, I'm Beatriz Ilari. I'm from the School of Music. I'm a violinist, I'm a music teacher, I'm a researcher, I'm a mom. But I chose a picture for you from my previous job. I taught in Brazil for many years, and these were some of my student teachers really enjoying a music PD session. So I wanted to share that with you to start with that. Okay, let's talk about music and self-care. Now, as someone who's been in music schools for most of my life, or music learning spaces, my research is actually on musicking in everyday life. And why? As much as I love the concert hall, I recognize that most people do not learn music through formal music programs, but they learn music through engagement in everyday life music. And I know that music is everywhere. You probably saw the term musicking, and this is not mine. I didn't invent it. It was a musicologist named Christopher Small who said that music is not a thing to be learned, but it's something that we do. It's an action, it's a verb, and it's something that we derive meaning from. So all of us, we might engage in singing and dancing, moving, creating, listening, you name it. The other thing I know from, there we go, that in different societies across the world, we have different uses of music and different functions, and some overlap. So in a past life, I also played a lot of weddings. A lot of musicians do that. And I always remember people saying, can you play us our song? But of course, our song might have been Nirvana, might have been Beethoven, and for some it was Beyonce, right? So it varied a lot. The other thing is that music happens in all these spaces, and these days also online. Think of Baby Shark. And also listening is a main form of engagement in some Western societies. So there was just a recent survey from the phonographic industry where they looked at 43,000 folks from all over the world, and they found that people listen to an average of almost 21 hours of music per week. So there's a lot of music happening. However, if I did this exercise with all of you and I asked you, how were you musical in the last 5 days? I presume that your responses would probably fall within 3 categories. In one category, I would have people who would say, I played my guitar, I sang in the shower, I listened to my favorite artist. The second group, usually academics are in there, would say, what do you mean by being musical? Does this count? Does playing a musical, does singing in my shower count? Does being in, cooking and dancing count? But there's always a third group, and that's the one I worry the most, that says, I'm not musical. I don't know anything about music. Oh, music's not for me. I only sing when no one's listening. Okay? And this has to do with conceptions of musicality, and I think in music schools we don't do a great job at reinforcing that we're all musical, right? And we all engage with music. So this is an issue, and this prevents a lot of people from engaging with music. But here's my evidence that we're all musical beings. There's a lot of research out there. Am I pointing to the right? Yeah, there we go. Most cultures have some form of music. In a past life, I've done a lot of things. Musicians usually do a lot of things. When I started doing research, I did research with infants in research labs and psychoacoustics labs. And one thing that I learned from that research is that babies come into the world with very sophisticated listening skills. In fact, they can listen to things that we adults can no longer listen to. So it's interesting that they come with all this musicality. I've worked with young children, that's my passion, and what's interesting is that young children are very open to the music we bring. It can be really weird, it can have funny sounds. If they like you as a teacher, chances are they'll like that music. However, once they start growing up, if you've taught middle schoolers and high schoolers, they don't like anything, right? That's always a challenge for music teachers. You have to engage with them. The other thing, but adolescents listen to more music than any other age group. And music is a badge of identity, and it's also something that's part of our autobiographical memory. So during COVID, there was a lot of evidence of older adults listening to music of their teens and early adulthood, and I see some people nodding, because that was something that brought good memories, good feelings. And so this has been demonstrated as well in research. And of course, music marks special occasions of our lives. Think of Happy Birthday. It's probably the most well-known song in the world. It's been translated into 1 million languages. I've heard it at least in 12 languages, but there are many, many more. So it is part of people's lives. So what's going on here, right? We have people being musical. The other thing I wanted to convince you is that music is also a form of self-care and caring of communities. Some people call it a technology of the self because many of us will use music to modulate our mood or affect. We did a study, it started during COVID, and then we did the second version of it called Parents as Home DJs, where we asked parents of children under the age of 5. They engaged in social media, we gave them playlists, we gave them a little bit of online training, if you will. But for a week, they played the role of DJs for their children. And we asked them, what are you listening to? And what do you notice in your child? So of course, these were almost 500 parents here in the US. And what was interesting was that many findings. The main one was that most of these parents said, I use music to regulate my child's mood, especially if my child is having a good day, I keep that music on because that music helps prolong that moment. Most of these parents were not trained in conservatoires and music schools. So there's something there. And this also aligns with, think back to the 43,000 respondents from the phonographic industry. They also said this, music helps us relax and cope with stress. So the parents were saying similar things. A last thing I'll say to you, there's also research on music as social life, music in groups, how we engage with communities. And some scholars believe that music has a semantic ambiguity. It means different things for different people. So we can go to the same show. I don't even know who the person next to me is, but we're celebrating that same artist, right? And by being together in time through singing, through moving, through clapping, doing the things that we do, there's this in the moment sense of group cohesion, at least in the moment. We forget about our political affiliations, the basketball team that we like and the other person doesn't like, or whatever. We forget all of that. We forget about the self and we become community. In fact, in research involving youth involved with the law, some scholars have found that music spaces, when well done, sometimes are not well done. When they're done in a way that's participatory and people identify with it, what happens is there's this moment of suspension, of an interval of with life. It's like taking a deep breath, right? And some have called these safe spaces. Music can do that. It doesn't always, but it can do that. So to end, I hope to have convinced you that, music is we're all musical beings. We all engage with musicking, and perhaps we all engage with different forms of musical care, perhaps unknowingly. So I'll leave you with a statement from the International Musical Care Network. This is a group of musicians, artists, scholars, practitioners, educators, music therapists, et cetera, that they have a series of videos. I should have put the links, sorry I didn't. But in one of the videos, this is what they say. Some people will never participate in formal music therapy sessions. Some people will never sing in a choir. Some people will prefer other forms of creative engagement altogether. But many people will have some engagement with music at some time, whether or not they see that engagement as an explicit form of care. Thank you.
All right.
I don't trust myself to keep to 6 minutes, so I am going to look at my notes, so pardon me for that. My name is Alison Trope. I'm a professor in the Annenberg School for Communication, and I am also the founder and director of Critical Media Project, which is what I'm going to talk about today. So Critical Media Project is an initiative and website that I founded and founded in 2013. And I'm going to use some of the work with Critical Media Project to think about how we can critique, change, and create new media narratives as paths to resilience, hope, and empathy. So some background about me. I'm a media and cultural studies scholar, so I approach the work through this kind of lens. It's a lens where I focus on critical media literacy. And critical media literacy is a type of media literacy which offers and facilitates not only the critical analysis of media, but also its critical creation. So critical media literacy centers on critically interrogating the power media has in shaping our lives and values and experiences. It challenges media messages and structures that reproduce oppression and discrimination, and it opens the possibility to create new narratives and bring in new voices. Briefly, Critical Media Project, which is a website, was designed to help youth see themselves, but also engage across difference by exploring questions of identity. And it's very small, but we look at 7 different identities on the site. We look at race and ethnicity, gender, LGBTQ plus identities, religion, disability, and age. And class. And so we look at all of these identities through the lens of media. As a website, we have over 700 pieces of media, all annotated with a series of questions that drive critical thinking around representation. But the site also has several resources, including several that focus on media making and media creation. I've worked with hundreds of youth in Los Angeles over the last 10 years, and in that we worked in traditional school settings as well as supplemental programs that have really impacted youth in significant ways. So I'm going to just walk you through some of the ways this work has had impact. So looking at some of the programs that we've done, this is one umbrella program called I2M. We take this from the Langston Hughes poem of the same name, and it centers around identity and voice. So the first program we did was called I2M, Teens, Media, Arts, and Belonging. It was an outdoor education program where we took kids on field trips to built environments as well as natural environments where they created media in these spaces to reflect on space and belonging. Where do they fit in? Where do they feel excluded? These were some of the questions that they asked, and they harnessed the power of media to explore those feelings. Next, we did a showcase and media festival where we not only showcased and put the film and media of students on display over at the Annenberg building, but we also had creative workshops, capacity building workshops in storytelling, music production, and other things. And finally, when COVID hit and we couldn't sort of have people come to USC or go on field trips, we created a space in the digital arena that was based on a curriculum called Critical Makers Lab. And so this was a 6-module curriculum that was based on 6 key questions where we had students make a media project tied to each question. The questions included, who am I? Where am I? What am I a part of? What am I not? How am I seen? And what is my why? And so I want to sort of talk to you about the resilience that the students exhibited or the youth exhibited through these projects. So these were projects created through the Critical Makers Lab, and we can see that they exhibit what we talk about with critical media literacy, which is a form of critical creation. This is creating work that has a point of view, that has an argument, that's grounded in some way, whether that's through the students' lived experience or through research that they may do. And so critical making, we argue, offers youth new ways of seeing and knowing and creating that self-knowledge. The students harness the power to advocate also for social change and for themselves. And we see this through having them do identity poems as well as digital collages. They make maps, sort of looking at the spaces of their community and finding, the parameters of that space. They create remixes or new movie posters that sort of showcase how they would like to be seen in the media. And they also create these other pieces, an I am, but I'm not, using an I am, but I'm not framework to sort of think about stereotypes and how they are rejecting them. So I'm going to just show you a really quick video that focuses on the media that students collected when they went on the outdoor field trips, and also it has a voiceover from one of the students.
I too am. Sometimes it's necessary to remind those around us that we belong here just as much as they do. Exclusion and displacement shouldn't exist in our society. We are all human. Somehow we have boxed each other into racial, ethnic, social, and economic boundaries. How is it that we got here? Why is it that we ourselves categorize and settle for what we have instead of what we could have? As a human race, we should work together accordingly and peacefully. It is much more convenient to become one rather than to be 7 billion different ones. I too am just like you. In fact, I am you, and you are me. We are all one.
Okay, so I think that piece is really poignant, especially in the last week. Just to end really quickly and think about how youth have responded to these programs. I just have a couple quotes, but basically I want to think about resilience. Resilience through the way they reflect on their own identities and the identities of those they meet, the way they use media to find voice, to validate who they are, the finding of who they are through, again, creating and imagining other worlds, building community and belonging, and really redefining spaces and places where they exist and sharing perspectives around that. So I'll just go to the next slide really fast. I have some beautiful quotes, where the students have also shared and spoken really deeply and vulnerably about how the media has affected them. All right, thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Thank you to Zoe and Corey and the whole team for having us here. I think this is a really important and meaningful panel and series of panels. My name is Miles Jackson, born and raised in DC. I grew up in inner city DC in the late 80s, early 90s when it was the post-crack cocaine epidemic, and there were a lot of murders. It was the murder capital, higher rates of AIDS than sub-Saharan Africa. And yet my parents kept me out of trouble, and I think sports and music were a lot of that. So I appreciate the other panelists discussing that. If I wanted to play sports, I had to get good grades and play music. I'm named after Miles Davis, my sister Lena after Lena Horne. And so I say all that because I was diagnosed with diabetes when I was 6 years old, and soccer was an outlet for me. There weren't too many other black kids in the neighborhood that played soccer. But I was very athletic and went on to play at the University of Michigan, was an academic All-American, and soccer really changed my life. Then I destroyed my knee and could never play again, and dreams of going pro were shattered. I don't think I would have made it nonetheless, but even though I didn't, sports changed my life in ways that I think not enough kids have access to sports and these opportunities. And whether it's because of cost, whether it's because it's not in the neighborhood, safe rec centers, any number. And I look around the room and it seems pretty diverse. I just graduated from USC Marshall. I was one of 4 black men amongst 200. So USC's not doing a good enough job. The country's not doing a good enough job. My father's a professor at Georgetown. They're not doing a good enough job. And so you look at Black success, and a lot of that is sports and entertainment. And I would argue, how many of you can name a famous Black person who's not an entertainer or an athlete? And I'm not going to make that challenge, but it's a problem that, we had the great I Too Am a Man from Langston Hughes and a lot of other great poems. So anyways, all that to say, I ended up studying abroad in Havana, Cuba, my last semester at the University of Michigan, and my partner and I started a nonprofit organization, Cuba Skate, to support and uplift young skaters on the island. It started as a small project to help friends who wanted to skateboard, but much because of US and the trade embargo, there are also political issues in Cuba. We remain apolitical and we'll let the Cubans deal with that. But we focused on sports as diplomacy. Worked a lot with Zoe's colleague who was once at Annenberg, Neftali Williams, who now leads the skateboarding, diplomacy, and surf and sport at San Diego State. I don't think you see more diversity than, certainly in music, but sports is a special place. And I think skateboarding especially, where doesn't matter how good or bad you are, doesn't matter what color you are, you're still gonna fall down when you hit a rock. It's very humbling. You learn a lot of these lessons in soccer that I think from being in business school and in academics, not enough kids play sports. They don't know how to work on a team. They don't know humility. They don't know when to shut up and just listen and build. And I think I learned, I was a walk-on in Michigan, and having to carry the goalposts in freezing cold weather, it teaches you lessons that you can't learn in reading a book. Nonetheless, skateboarding, as you see here, we're building a skate park at an abandoned gymnasium that before the revolution was a mafia headquarters. That's where Lucky Luciano and all the others would fly in. And then after the revolution, Fidel turned it into public housing, athletic fields, et cetera, et cetera. This area had been abandoned for about 30, 40 years, and we went, and DIY is the idea of do it yourself. And I think in skateboarding, nowhere does the connection and visceral embodiment of community. You skate around, you go to a corner store, you take the bus, you're physically attached to the community that soccer, basketball, a lot of other sports, it doesn't exist. So I'll go through all these. Yeah, I think you guys could read all this, and I don't like to talk too much, but the idea of, empowerment through sports, skateboarding is a great way where you think about you have to fall down 1,000,000 times before you land a trick. You don't have a coach. You're not doing it to win a game. You're doing it because it's fun. Music is very connected to skateboarding, whether you're listening to music when you skate or you think about a 45-minute skate video that is really brought to life by different music. A lot of that for me was rap music, but also oldies. Creedence Clearwater is one of my favorite bands. They've got great music, and it's storytelling. Anyways, it's a space where boys, girls, men, women, people of all different races and nationalities can come together. I think we saw a lot of that in the Olympics this summer. We have done a lot in sustainability, and that has been centered on it's difficult to get grants to work in Cuba because of the political situation. We got a really great grant from the Vanity Fair Corporation to recycle plastic waste from the ocean and rivers, and that gets upcycled and turned into eco-madera, like eco wood, that is then turned into a recycled plastic skate park. And so we're showing the government that skateboarding's good. We're showing that these young men and women are vanguards and champions of their society and their community, and that you care. And you think about the environment. Cuba is a coastal island that is surrounded by a lot of seashore. The underbelly of Cuba has no ports, which is something that, like him or not, Castro did do a lot for education and other things for the country of Cuba. And there are more than 40,000 flora and fauna life that exists nowhere else in the world. So kudos to them for doing that. So that was a great program. We're continuing to do that, and it gives these young Cubans an opportunity to not just be skateboarders, but we had to think, I'm not Cuban, and I didn't start skating till later in life. I think it's important being a leader that you have your stakeholders as leaders and give them the power and the opportunity to decide, oh, we have all these skateboards, we're gonna do this. No, what do they wanna do? And I think too often you see people saying, oh, we're gonna do this program, but what do the streets want? What do they need from us? And playing your role. Skateboarding in general, as has been the topic here, well-being, I think no matter what's going on in life, there are a lot of challenges, but sports is an outlet that music can be, that I think sports more than anything for me, playing basketball, playing soccer, skateboarding, it can provide a lot of peace when you don't know where your next meal's coming from, when you gotta worry about getting money from mom and dad, when you gotta worry about how you're gonna get home tonight, or who's going to cook dinner, and so many other things. So having a community that looks after you and that maybe you don't have siblings, but these people become your brothers and sisters. And I do think that it exists in all sports, but I think it's just a special thing in skateboarding. So I think we all face challenges no matter who you are. I think about being a black man with diabetes. The odds are stacked against me in a lot of ways, and yet here I am. I just got my MBA. I'm looking at new jobs. I'm leading a skateboarding organization, and it's never feeling sorry for yourself. And I think that's another thing that you learn for sports, that the world is bigger than you skateboarding or kicking a soccer ball or whatever it may be. And having these connections and friendships in any sport, culture, music, academics, it's important. And it's good to have people that look like you, but also that don't look anything like you, or that come from different backgrounds, and you can find that allegiance and affinity to something that you both share. I think the developing skills is also important. We developed a wood shop and started building all these DIY skate parks because we had to think, what happens when this kid's skateboard is broken? What are we doing for him or her? I did a nonprofit executive management program at Georgetown, and we really started to think, what are we doing for them when they become adults and no longer skateboarding? So we developed these woodworking programs where we recycle and manufacture skateboards. And again, just providing tools, whether it's through arts, whether it's through designing skateboards, manufacturing skateboards, designing skate parks, but putting tools and resources in their hands without being like this savior complex. I think that a lot of the problems in Latin America, in Africa, and other parts of the world are because America really likes to meddle in other people's business without fixing things in our own backyard. So I think just more talking points, but I'm very passionate about skateboarding, about community and sports, and I think that it's changed my life for the better. I think in watching the Olympics last summer, as we think about LA having the World Cup coming here soon, and thinking about the Olympics coming back in 2028, it's not just sports in the sense of the LeBron James and Kevin Durant coming from difficult upbringings and making it and being million-dollar players, but it's what lessons do they learn, and what about the million other kids that didn't get the chance to play and get to a college level? So, thank you.
Thank you. Great job.
All right. Hello, everyone. Hi, Jean. It's so good to be here with you all. I'm Briana Hinga. I use she and her pronouns. I am an associate professor of clinical education here. And I've also, I played 2 sports in college, basketball and track, and then I was a professional beach volleyball player. I'm also a community organizer, really engaged in transformative justice, intersectional racial justice. And these informal learning spaces, third spaces as we call them, have been really formative for me. And so as I was thinking about, what would I like to speak to on this panel? I realized that I had a chance to maybe draw some threads across the amazing lessons that we've taken from the panelists by focusing on a learning space that is always with us, no matter what kind of learning space we're in. So I'm actually gonna give you a little riddle and give you 3 hints and ask you to guess this third space or this informal learning space. So the first hint is, I am always with you. Second, many schools require you to shut me off to complete assignments. Then lastly, you might remember me when you tune into your breath. And I'm curious if anyone has guessed. The learning space that I'm focused on is the body, because the body is always with us. So often we're asked to turn off our bodies, not listen to or even acknowledge our bodies in formal learning spaces. And it's also a site of incredible possibility. I mean, we've heard our speakers speak to this. And the way that we treat our own bodies and honor the bodies of others is also a microcosm of our larger structures. So I'm inviting us to some reflection around that we can do, really personally. So Just a quick invitation to collective breath. If folks feel comfortable, to just tune into your breath a little bit, maybe take a deep breath and feel your belly just filling up with air. And hold it and then just let it release slowly. And as you continue to tune into that process of your breath, I invite you to consider the way that as your body releases that air, you don't have to worry that it's not going to come back. And you're just in this continual cycle of mutual exchange with the plants around us, where you're giving them what they need to live, they're giving us what we need to live, and our body is so knowledgeable, so wise, and whether or not we're acknowledging our bodies or thinking about them, they're always with us, and they have so much to offer us. And students in my class will recognize this slide. Part of this conversation, I think, is really important to acknowledge why the wisdom, the brilliance of our bodies is not welcomed into many of these learning spaces, and the legacy of that, as well as the legacy of folks who have always asked us to bring our fullness. So on this side, we see René Descartes, a French philosopher in the 1600s, who said, "I think, therefore I am." And by thinking here, he was speaking about logical, rational thinking that white European men were claiming as theirs, and saying that this way of thinking is what it means to actually be. So while I'm not trying to dismiss some of what comes from logical, rational Enlightenment thinking, because it gives us Western math, we can build buildings and create cars, right? And also, if we are flattening what it means to be to this kind of thinking, that's asking us to separate our minds from our bodies. It's asking us to separate our bodies from the earth. It's asking us to create racialized categories of people. And this kind of thinking philosophy was used to justify the stealing of indigenous lands and enslavement, because humanity was defined in this socially constructed way. And so understanding this legacy is really important to think about what part of the legacy do we want to be part of, because there's also a legacy which Audre Lorde is showing on the other side of the slide, and she was a Black American woman born in Harlem in the 1930s, also a lesbian woman, and she said, "I feel, therefore I can be free." And so she is creating space for all of us to be in our fullness. She was very clear that really attuning to the fullness, the power, the wisdom that our bodies hold as being really crucial to being in right relationship with each other, with the earth. And again, just to distinguish between, she's not asking us to flatten ourselves or create categories of what counts as humanity. She's creating space for all of us. So just to think about how sometimes schooling can just act as this way of socially constructing a justification for stratification based on what we count as knowledge within these spaces, what we ask students to leave out, what we value within these spaces. Whereas learning, we can think about it, and all of our panelists have spoken to this, is really reaching for something that is fundamentally unknowable and is open to possibilities. And I think we really need this in this time as we reach into possibilities that are unknowable. And I won't read these quotes, but I just ask you to consider these questions around, for ourselves, how are we relating to our own bodies? And how might we transform conditions that isolate, numb, and break us? How might we tend to our bodies and honor our power? And how might we open space for difference and authentic expression? And we're here for each other. I think everyone that came here is really interested in these kind of questions. So really getting to connect with each other and feel into our bodies and dream into these worlds, I think is so important, especially now. So thank you for letting me share.
Thank you. There's an advancement. There we go. So that was really powerful to see you all take a collective breath. I felt it up here. Thank you to the panel. Yeah, that's another round of applause. So I actually just am going to throw one question out there and then open it up for anyone else who has questions. But I thought it was so fascinating, all the through lines, like the creativity came through to me in a really big way, community, the role of space, the role of resilience. I love this wow, and also wow in the mundane, I was thinking about. The role of play, and I want to talk for a little bit about listening. By any chance, is Maura Gonzalez here, who RSVP'd, or maybe she's online? But when you RSVP'd for this event, you could submit a question to the audience. So I'm going to share Maura's question, and then just kind of add some of my own questioning onto it. So she asked, are the mental health providers, or let's just say practitioners in this space, culturally trained or certified or to represent the community that they're serving? And I am wondering, what are the strategies and the tactics that you use to really listen to the people that you're working with, the people you're serving, the spaces that you're creating, that you're co-designing, to really hear people in a really profound way, and then tailor your services or your outreach or your approach to those people? If that makes sense. I'm just kind of curious to know your tactics for listening deeply. And I think, this applies, all of us can push ourselves in how we listen to others, especially right now when we're in such a polarized society. How are we creating space to really listen deeply to others? So let's go this way. Davina, if you wouldn't mind.
I think for me, it's relying on human-centered design tactics and methodology, quite honestly, and inclusive design methodology, where we are actively doing the research within a community. I will use that Ted Lasso quote of being a goldfish. I really do want to go into that generative research without my own baggage and really listen to the people, actively listen, not just for comprehension, but for understanding around the daily experience of working with those individuals. So trying to put that aside and also making sure that I have a really robust set of interview guidelines and questions that I come into that process with that are non-leading.
Your slides at the get-go were I'm going to go back and look at those slides, because I think you shared some very concrete ways that we can bring these practices into the work that we do. So thank you for that. On that note, I think we are posting this. I think we'll probably post the slide deck, and we definitely post the recording of this session so you can revisit at your leisure. Yeah, Martin.
Something for me that's important is, in communication, like 70 to 93% is nonverbal. So in that sense, we're kind of like perceiving the whole person as they're communicating, rather than just like, what are they saying? Because you can be like, yeah, everything's fine. And I'm like, something's not okay. The words say you're fine, but I'm reading, there's something else happening. I'm picking up on something else. And I think being able to actively listen to the whole person and being willing to be vulnerable and say something like, yeah, it sounds like you're saying everything's okay, but I don't know, I feel like maybe I'm picking up on something else, and being willing to ask those follow-up questions I think is so important, especially when working with people who feel like you don't care, assuming that you don't really want to know how they really feel, to give that extra layer of no, I do care and I really do want to know. And it's having that extra layer of invitation I think is very important. And then of course mindfulness, to what extent do I already have an idea of who this person is, and I think that's really important to kind of be aware of our own stereotypes, our own biases, because then that prevents us sometimes from seeing the person for who they are. And so in that sense, there's a lot of self-awareness, and your own in touch with kind of what Briana was sharing. It's are you in touch with your body and the way you feel? Because if not, then you might be giving off signals of discomfort, even though you feel like you're totally fine, but your body language is when you're around somebody that's different from you because you don't quite feel comfortable. So being aware of that in yourself, I think, can really tell you a lot about how you're showing up.
that also makes me think about the digital space, and maybe Alison will get to this, but sometimes, in some ways, Zoom, when you're on a Zoom, you're up very close and personal with someone, so that's like very intimate, but also you do kind of lose some of the nonverbal, especially if screens are off. And I think that as we get, more kind of, if we're in moments of social isolation, that's just an added challenge to really being able to read the nonverbal and how they're showing up in a space. Something to consider. Thank you, Martin.
Yeah, I think in music, I always like to think about you can use it, you can communicate through music, in music, and with music, right? So there are different ways. So sometimes, putting aside the music school, because then you have hierarchies and other things you need to navigate, but looking at students, for example, sometimes it's actually talking about a piece or listening to a piece of music. That's when you start looking at all those cues, right? It's like, why did you choose this piece that's so aggressive? Or there's, this lyrics or whatnot. I mean, there are ways that, you can use. And again, you don't need to be musically trained. It's just really paying attention to, okay, why was that choice? And even with kids, you can notice, why have you picked that? Tell me about that. And sometimes that's a good way to get into other questions, other issues.
One of my favorite methodologists is Johnny Saldana, who has a drama background. But for the students in the room who are thinking about their interview protocols, if you're, thumbs up for Saldana, nice. For those of you that are working, I mean, it really could be anyone, but I'm thinking in particular with teenagers or college-age students, to ask them a question about, like, what music are you listening to? Or, like, if you could give a sound, like, what's a song that sums up the soundtrack of your life? That's maybe not like a go-to question you would think to put into an interview protocol, but it can really be generative and kind of help you understand that person's soul. Anyway, thanks, Beatriz.
So some of your questions made me think of the one way we do listening is having students keep a media diary. And sort of think not just about analytical frames in terms of what they're looking at and what it means, but also tapping into how do I feel when I am scrolling, through TikToks or Instagram, and really tapping into the fact that they're not necessarily always aware of those feelings. But then the other way, we engage in listening, I would say, is through really looking at or reading the media so that we can hear, the youth voices essentially through the media that they're creating. And so I feel like that kind of content analysis is a form of listening. We're working often with several youths, so we're not necessarily having one-on-one conversations always, but I find that that's a really productive kind of way to sort of read and see how they're feeling.
Alison, just in terms of what you've seen in local high schools, do you see that there is space for people to be digital creators? And I'm not talking about the influencers, I'm talking about the critical media creation that you do. Because I think that when we think about like digital equity gaps, I believe that to be a real challenge that we're still facing, that some students have access to really rich, interesting digital learning and literacy, and then in other schools, this is something that's totally overlooked. What are you seeing?
I mean, I think also with the focus on testing or whatever the institution's sort of standards are, you don't see a lot of room for this. And so what we try to argue is that there is a way in which this kind of digital creation is a form of essay writing or is a form of other types of literacy where you can make an argument, you can make a case for something, and use some of the same tools that you would in English language arts or in social studies or in ethnic studies or in advisory. So we've been used in all different kinds of classroom spaces, but I think providing the teachers with the tools and providing them with the kind of infrastructure and the curriculum has been really helpful.
Thank you.
I would add for Cuba Skate and the work that we've done, this DIY skate park's been a really special place because every skate park's different, but it really does depend on the style of the skater, whether you're a street skater or a bowl skater. Bowl skating never really existed in Cuba. It was mainly street skating, and so when we started working on the pool, I thought that was really fun because it's like you take a three-point shooter and make him or her play in the post, and it helps develop like different neurons in your mind. It makes you think differently. It makes you look at the obstacle differently. That altogether has been a really great project because we give our staff, participants, and team there the idea and opportunity that they can build whatever they want. And I think it exists in every society where you have a ceiling. And again, I'm not Cuban. I've lived and worked there for some time, but it's not my right to condone their government or their way of life. But within communism and socialism, there are a lot of ceilings. And I'd say that even growing up in America with capitalism, there are also different types of ceilings. And so telling a young kid that they can do whatever they want, they will make incredible things. And the last thing that I'll add there is that we developed a merit-based system where for some time we'd give away skateboards and resources at contests where the best skaters would always get the new pair of shoes, the boards, and things like that. And then we realized, like, how do you get new kids wanting to skateboard if the same ones are always winning stuff? So then it becomes, oh, you know what? If I mix this amount of cement and build, then with my 8 hours of work, I get a pair of shoes, a skateboard, a set of trucks, whatever. But also I'm not just doing something for myself, I'm doing it for hundreds of other kids. And in doing that, then you see the better skaters, they become role models. And so there are all these opportunities that I think, again, this idea and mentality of DIY and doing it yourself is very empowering. I have always loved the Nelson Mandela quote about sports doing things and, unifying people in ways that others can't. I would also say I heard a good one recently that's deeds, not words. So don't tell me what you're going to do, but show me. And I think that that's been a really powerful opportunity for skateboarding to flourish in Cuba.
Miles, I want to flip my question a little bit and ask you about, okay, so the Olympics are coming. I know you have really amazing ideas about that sustainability piece here in Los Angeles. And given that skateboarding is often really stigmatized and written off by a lot of the muckety mucks up there, like, how do you get people to listen to you? Or how should we get the city to listen to skateboarders about what the city should be doing? And how do we get, this speaks to the research that I've done, educators to not write off the skaters that come into their class and actually see them as like, oh wow, I'm guessing you're a really cool kid, like to reframe. So can you talk a little bit about like what would you like the city to listen to? Like, how would you like them to listen to you?
Yeah, great question. LA is a special place because skateboarding has existed here for so long and it is a mecca and cultural hub of skateboarding. I would say to those of you that have students that skateboard, are they on a longboard or an electric skateboard? And I'm not discriminating, but it's a different lifestyle altogether. And so the question about LA, and so we struggled with the grants and donations because of Cuba and the trade embargo, but also you're giving a kid a skateboard, so what? But you have to really communicate and articulate how a skateboard is an instrument for a young boy or girl, how they don't learn, not to say they don't learn in the classroom with music, but this tool and instrument is teaching them resiliency, perseverance, this, that, the third, teamwork, even if there isn't a coach. And the last piece about LA, a classmate and I worked on an independent study and taking this recycled plastic skate park model, we often see with the Olympics that post-games they become ghost towns. And so that happened in Rio, in London, and a handful of other cities. And so our idea is that you build this big skate park that is hybrid and modular, that's part cement, but also recycled plastic. So you can activate the communities of Crenshaw, Long Beach, Compton, East LA, Boyle Heights, et cetera, send these kids through youth development programs to the beach to clean up or even in their neighborhoods. Then they get to make these skate parks. And then post-game, you take these plastic modular elements and put them all along Expo line. And in doing so, in having a skate park, that becomes a community center. You put up trees, there's shade. There are people hanging out, they're congregating. Then you get a Black-owned or a Latino-owned coffee shop. Then you get a skate shop. Then there are all these kind of tangential things that can happen. And a great case in point is what San Francisco did with, I believe it was the UN Plaza, which had been riddled with drug abuse, gang violence, this, that, the third. They turned it into a skate park. and said, we know that if skateboarders are here, maybe they're smoking a J or maybe drinking a 40 or whatever it is, but they're not shooting up heroin, they're not doing these drugs or that drugs. And in fact, it polices the community in a way that otherwise couldn't happen. So my thought, Zoe, is that, again, I don't think that sports and skateboarding can save the world, but if you give it a chance, it can do a lot better than what's the current happening.
Thank you, Marcy. Briana?
Maybe I have two things to add to the question. It was around cultural responsive listening, right? So one thing is structurally making sure that we do have teachers, leaders in our third spaces who do actually represent the cultures, the race, the experiences of the students that they're serving, and making sure that we have very clear pipelines for that. And, you know, as a school of education, how we're engaged in that process of representation. I think that's really important structurally. And then the second thing, you know, as a personal practice of listening, really being able to practice with myself, how might I be needing to have an answer or needing to control my own feelings or my own body, and how might that show up in the way I listen to others? So if I can really be in a practice of allowing whatever is there for me, holding that with compassion, and allowing the generativity of that, then that allows me to show up for others in a way that really allows for whatever is there as well.
Thank you. Okay, we have time for one or two questions from the audience. Please, do 1 second and you'll get the mic so people can hear you online.
So thank you. It's been amazing. I've been jotting down like a million notes. But my question, I work with deaf education directly. So when you guys are speaking on these third spaces, and it all sounds amazing, but it's not something that is typically accessible, especially in that organic sense that you really spoke to. So everything has to be so intentional and planned out. So they miss out on a lot of that working with the community and being able to bring their culture as well as other cultures. And so it becomes very marginalized and just focused on certain things. I mean, even just the access of going to a museum and everything was auditory and there were no captions, there's no signage, and then it takes on a different role for us as instructors or facilitators. Rather than engaging that conversation, you're lesson planning again, you're teaching. And so how do you think you could see integrating something that's more organic for people that struggle with that accessibility? Could be languages or deaf education in mind.
Yeah.
Beautiful question. Thank you so much.
I'll go ahead and jump in there. I think it's dependent for me on the museum, the institution that I'm working with, quite honestly. Some are more committed than others, as we know, to that conversation. A lot of that can be worked through with the community, given gallery educators who are actually, that is their job as docent, to be in the gallery with those communities, specifically working with those needs. So hopefully some of those institutions are available. The Getty does a good job with that, for example. Other institutions do not have the resources, I'll just be blunt, right, to have additional staff who are trained to that level and should be working at that level, which is where the environment is really needing to kick in and be supportive. Right? So where are we offering up additional resources for that engagement opportunity to different learning communities, right? One of those being the labels that you mentioned. I'd be really curious, and maybe we can go offline and talk about where the labels were missing, because that is a huge component of it. Not that we want all of our audiences to be reading everything in every moment, but having the material there and available should you decide to engage with it, right? If it's missing, there's a problem. If it's available and you choose not to engage with it, that's different, right? And then also having supplemental materials to the gallery. While it's not ideal, making sure that those environments are having additional materials as requested from the community and drafted with the community. So, short answer there, but I think they do need to do the work.
anyone else like to respond? I'll just say that, I think you even asking that question, we can have every intention to try and create the most inclusive spaces we can think of, and yet we still fall short. We always fall short. And so I think that that's incumbent on us to always keep pushing ourselves to think, whose voices are we missing? Whose perspectives are we missing? Yeah. Thank you for that.
I would also add, I lived in DC for some time, well, most of my life, and Gallaudet, which is the Deaf School of America, is there, and they have some really great youth development programs. And then, not that I have ample experience, but we had a few deaf kids in Cuba that got into skateboarding, and just the body feel and like the wheels on the street and vibrations were really good. And one very touching story was one of our like better skaters who became a great leader. One time I seen him doing sign language, and I was like, Alberti, how do you know that? He's like, oh, one of my best friends when he was a kid, like he was deaf, so I had to learn it. And so anyways, my answer is generally always like sports or read a book, but I do think that those are good opportunities.
And I think just to add, with media creation, I think, there is an accessibility there, right? So they don't have to create necessarily something with sound, or they could create something with sound. But just the idea of using the media as a way to tap into who they are, and it doesn't have to be about their deaf identity. It could be other facets of their identity that they want to lean into and sort of explore through media making.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tay Thompson. I'm an alum of USC, but I'm wearing the wrong jacket today. I'm a doctoral student at UCLA. I get to see some of my professors up there. My questions really revolved around, I'm leading an organization that focuses on providing financial literacy and other life skills training to foster youth. And when we're going into schools, we're going into Los Padrinos, and we're going into different community centers, and we're trying to create this culture of learning, right, these third spaces, oftentimes we get a little bit pushback from folks who are, who want the data, who are leading the things, who say, hey, in the MOU, you said this. And so oftentimes when we're coming and we're bringing the music that the youth want to listen to, when we're coming and we're dancing or we're doing activities, we feel like there's this person who's looking at us from up top and looking down and say, what are you doing? And then the youth love it and they want us to come back. But how do you all sort of navigate that sort of like positioning, right, of having and knowing how critical and interesting and how necessary these spaces are to build and to create, but yet having the stressors and the challenges of people behind you with the funds and the resources and the institutions and the names and the glamour to kind of say, no, that's not how you do it. This is how you do it.
Tay, if I might add to your question, because I think that we are potentially heading into a period where we're going to have to advocate for different perspectives. I'm thinking in particular of trans youth, to audiences that are not necessarily ready to hear what we know to be good practice. So feel free to kind of chime into that as well. So I think your question's about like advocating for the goodness of third spaces, right? And that informal learning to the people that can gatekeep and also provide funding. Any insights? Briana.
First of all, DeMonte, it's so good to see you. Thank you for coming. I really appreciate you bringing foster youth into the conversation. And my thought is just very practical in terms of wearing my community organizer hat in the ways that sometimes when you want to do something that might not get funding from the government or other official agencies, you can partner with a nonprofit organization where they become your fiscal sponsor, the money goes through them, and you never need to become an official organization through the state or a nonprofit through the state. I know that's not necessarily the position that you're in, but just kind of something to think about is I do think we need wraparounds for how we do get funding that don't ask us to rely on these official pathways. Yes.
I was just gonna say that, as you probably know, like significant proportion of foster youth are LGBTQ. It's like between 20 and 30%. So you know, oftentimes we're an invisible population within the kind of foster youth community, and so sometimes like addressing those needs, you have to do it very subversively, and in some ways, you know, for some young people, it's safer for them to not come out as well because they might not get a placement, or because you're worried about abuse or rejection, or maybe they can't get access to healthcare because they don't have approval because they're under 18. I wish I had an answer for this, because it seems like you're the answer for this. You know what I mean? Like, you're the bridge. You know, you're the one who's seeing the benefit, and then you also have that kind of like academic knowledge to translate. You know, like sometimes you just got to be creative and like, say it in a way that academics can be like, oh, I love rap music. I do think that's a good idea. And you're like, why? It's like legitimate music. Like, but you kind of like, you've been learning how to like translate that language through your heart. Like, I think that to me is like our role, is like, because you see something that is valuable and you care and you're wanting to get this access to these resources, and like even just asking the question is like coming from like, again, your heart and your spirit. And I feel like that, I just want to like highlight that desire for people to get what they need, and like I'll come up with anything to try and figure out how to get you this thing that you need, and to honor and value what you find meaningful for you. Like, I think how you go about doing it, I'm not sure, but the way you're going about doing it, I think is so beautiful.
Snaps. And I'll just add, I think there's tremendous power in storytelling, and I know there's a lot of doctoral students in the space, and you're going to be doing your studies that are going to be in, you know, academic form, and also I can't emphasize enough how you need to find other venues to share the knowledge that you're gaining, to share the voices that you're going to have the privilege of hearing through your research. How are you going to share those stories with varied audiences? Because what's going to happen is, because you are coming through, and I've seen this from the skate study, because you are coming through USC, people are going to listen to you differently. So all of a sudden, you're going to be in a place where actually people are going to listen to like, oh, I hadn't thought about commuter students that way. I hadn't thought of trans students. I hadn't thought of skateboarders that way. But because you're, you know, you're doing what you're doing. This is like a pep talk for all of the doc students out there. You know, you have this beautiful opportunity and responsibility to tell those stories that really can shift the way we feel, our body feels about something, and then that, you know, can change people's policies. So yeah. I am so grateful to all of you for being here. Thank you for coming. There's going to be a lovely reception right after this, so feel free to hang out. And thank you so much, panelists. This is beautiful. And that's a wrap. All right.